Welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today I'm delighted to have with us one of my favorite authors who I've known for far too many years, far more than either I or she would like to acknowledge,
I
Elizabeth
won't.
Boyle. Elizabeth's new book, A Little Town of Bethlehem, will soon be available in bookstores like the Poison Pen and libraries near you. If you would like a copy, please give us a call at the Poison Pen or go online. We would be happy to hold one for you or put one in the mail. Now, I would like to welcome author Elizabeth Boyle.
Well, hi, John. It's so good to see you.
It's wonderful to see you, Elizabeth. I'm just delighted you have a new book out. It seems like it's been ages. But before we talk about your new book, I always am fascinated as a reader because authors don't just emerge from nowhere. They have a past themselves. So can you tell us a little bit about who Elizabeth was before you became a published author?
Who I was before. Well, I always wanted to write. That was a given. But I got out of college and discovered that, writers have to pay bills, which is really just, you know,
Annoying.
yeah, adulting 101.
Mhm.
So I went to work for law firms and kind of found a passion there. Working as a paralegal, I ended up kind of, I don't know, specializing in trial work. So I worked on a lot of different, like, insurance fraud and arson cases, and eventually worked for a large software company working in counterfeiting and piracy. So quite a wide range of experiences and interaction with a lot of different people that kind of fed my writing in many ways. Because there's a lawyer that I worked for a long time, and he said every case can be boiled down to three things: sex, greed, and revenge. And that really is, for a lot of things in life, the truth: sex, greed, and revenge. So
Mhm.
it makes for great fiction.
So you worked in the corporate world, but you wanted to be a writer. What led you to become a published author? What was your path to publication?
Well, I had started writing what I really love to read, which was romance novels, and especially historical romance novels. So, and had written two or three books that are still like in boxes under the stairs and will remain there the rest of my days. But there was a competition back in the 90s. I guess we're dating ourselves now. Yes, we did have computers back then, but there was no Google. And you could submit an opening three chapters, and if you became a finalist, they'd invite you to submit the full manuscript, and um, then one out of five of those people would get their book published. It was really fun. And so I submitted my three chapters and didn't really give it much thought, because I was convinced I would have time to finish the book before they announced the finalists. And of course, I didn't. So I was traveling for work at the time, and I had got a hold of my husband because I was in Newark, New Jersey. I'll never forget it. It was middle of a snowstorm in like February, and everybody's lined up at the telephone booths, doesn't that date it, trying to rearrange their flights because everything was getting canceled. And so I called my husband to tell him what new flight I was on and everything. And he said, "You got a letter from like Dell Publishing." And I was like, "I what?" And he said, "Yeah, it's out in the car." And I'm like, "Well, go get it now." So while he ran out to his car, I sat on the phone going, "Yeah, yeah, all the people behind me waiting, because I had to know what was on this letter and I wasn't going to stand in the line again. So he starts to read it, and I was a finalist, and I had about, I think, 30, 60 days to finish the book. So I was getting up at 3 and 4 in the morning and writing till I had to leave from work. And then I would come home and write for another couple hours and grab a couple hours of sleep. And I got down to the last day, and I had checked everything in Seattle for overnight service to New York, from FedEx to UPS to the mail. And
Yeah.
I had the drop dead times for every single one of them. And then they started ticking off like, you're too late for this, you're too late for that. And it was a Sunday and it needed to be there on a Monday. And I wasn't going to make it. I just wasn't going to make it. I had missed all my deadlines and I'm just sobbing and crying because here's my 1 out of 5 chance to get published. And I heard my husband on the phone in the other room. And I'm thinking, yeah, he's calling my mom to say, take her back. I'm done. I'm not going to deal with this. But instead, he was cashing in all his airline miles for a round trip ticket to New York from Seattle. And a few hours later, with my finished manuscript in his backpack, he looked like the little kid from Sleepless in Seattle because I made him a sandwich and stuff. He got on, flew a red eye to New York, delivered my manuscript to Dell, turned around, walked through Central Park, and went back out to the airport and caught a return flight home. And then we had to sit for like 6 months until the RWA conference, which was every summer, and they announced the winner. And I had it was just wild. But the interesting thing was I was sitting with my critique group and they wanted us all to come up to the front and sit at the front table and eat our lunches and everything. And I was like, I don't want to do that, but I had to. My chair got vacated. And my group says this woman came up and sat down. And when they read her name tag, they were stunned because she had been a judge in an earlier contest that I'd entered. And she had written on my entry, your writing is unprofessional and you will never publish. And they said when she sat down in my chair, they knew I was going to win because who else should be sitting there when I won? And then I won. And that started my career and literally had at least 1 or 2 books out for 20 years.
That was
So,
Brazen Angel, was it?
yeah.
Your first book?
Yeah, Brazen Angel. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just got a new cover too. It's really,
that is still available digitally.
yeah. Pardon?
It's available digitally, ebook.
It's available in print and digitally.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yep.
So you had a long career writing historical romance.
I did.
Now you've kind of taken a turn. It's similar but different. What can you tell us about A Little Town of Bethlehem?
I took all the elements that I really loved about writing romance, those strong relationships. I've always written from a place of kind of humor and, those human qualities that are just
Quirky, yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, imperfect people. I love imperfect people. They're just so fascinating. And I got the idea for the story while we were on a family vacation. And we were driving across, and you'll love this, Wyoming, from Cody, Wyoming, and we were going towards Gillette. So there's not a lot in between, not a lot. And our youngest had really thought we were going home when we left Cody. But when he realized we were still going east, he started to cry. And he cried pretty much from Cody almost the whole way to Gillette. Nothing would suit him. Just go home, sob, 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 go home, sob, 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 go home. And we were like, oh God, please just stop. Nothing would soothe him. But in the middle of that torrent, I just started staring out the window and started looking at the little towns we were passing through and going over the mountain pass and all these things. And all of a sudden it was like this story idea and this character that originally I had written about and tried to build a story off of 20 years earlier started to move. So the lead character, Madeline Drake, has been with me since I began writing and finally found her story in a small mining town in Wyoming. And I thought, what would it be like to be transported back to these small little ghost towns? And what if it really was a ghost town where it was stuck in time and you could go there? And I've always liked the idea of It's a Wonderful Life, that redemption story of Your life is worth more than you think it is. And so many people struggle in their lives because they just simply haven't found their purpose. They get lost chasing the wrong things. And if they stop and look around, they will realize how loved they are, how surrounded they are by people who really care about them. And that's the story I began to write, were people who were very stuck in their lives. And if you put them in a place where they have to stop and re-examine their life, the catalyst is there. And then they begin to see a better purpose, a higher purpose, better relationships, stronger friendships, deep friendships. So that is kind of the premise.
You've written, I mean, some people might think, wow, it's a shift to go from historical regencies to this kind of time slip, a little bit paranormal, supernatural, mystical, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, magical realism, whatever.
Magical realism. But you've done a little bit of that before in your historical regencies.
I did. I did. I wrote two historical regencies that were based on a kind of a fairy magic system. There was the first book is, I got to get them in the right order, His Mistress by Morning, in which a character inherits a ring. She was hoping for a big inheritance, so she'll actually be able to get married because she has no money. But instead, she gets this just lowly little ring. And what she doesn't realize is that the ring will grant her a wish. And so as she watches her crush go by in a fancy carriage, she said, with his mistress, she thinks to herself, I wish I could be the woman next to him. And when she wakes up the next morning, she's his mistress. And her entire world has been turned upside down. And so, and at first she's like, I've got to get back to my old life. But then when she realizes the perks of being a mistress, she just, maybe not, but so.
Now, obviously, you're in a new time period, early 20th century, a different setting for a little town of Bethlehem. What kind of research did you have to do? And what did you discover about Wyoming that surprised you?
Um, I did a lot of research. I did a lot of trips to Wyoming. Being from Seattle, it's not too hard to get there. Though I have to say, one time I checked in and I was flying to Laramie, and the gal that was checking me in goes, I need to see your passport. And I said, I'm going to Laramie. And she says, yes, I need your passport. I said, Laramie, Wyoming? And she really had no clue where I was going. I was like, oh my gosh, you work and travel, but I really tried to go off the beaten path when I went. I went to a lot of ghost towns, drove up into mountains all by myself into places I probably shouldn't have gone. Ended up in a small town called Encampment, which is south of Rawlins, kind of more towards the Colorado border. What a fascinating little town. And that's really what I based my town off of, was Encampment in about 1907. It had a huge population at the time. It had a copper mill. It had electricity before just about anybody else had electricity. It generated via the copper mill. And the interesting thing was, when the copper mill went bust and the electricity ended, the electricity for the town ended, and they had to go back to being without electricity for another almost 30 years before all the lines and everything got strung into town and out to everybody. And I was just like, oh my gosh, to have had electricity and then to have it cut off. But yeah, but small town life was fascinating. How people, they didn't have, oh, let's binge Netflix tonight or whatever. Their entertainment was them. And finding the dances and the different activities that people did and the clubs they belonged to. Club life to me was very interesting because it's not something we have now, that they did at the turn of the century, all the way up into the 50s and 60s. I can remember my grandmother being involved in a garden club and a bridge club and all these different clubs. And that was a very huge factor in people's lives at that time. So those clubs were really fun to research, and digging into their lives. It was a lot of fun. The one place I found the best research was at the University of Wyoming at the American Heritage Center. What an amazing treasure trove of Americana. Just absolutely outstanding. And then just a lot of the people I met were so nice. When I was in encampment, small town, about the second day I was there, everybody knew who I was, and they were all like, "You're the writer," and I'm like, "Yes, I am." And have you seen this? And they would trundle me off to someplace. I stopped at an old building just because I liked the building, and then the woman comes out and she ran a grocery exchange out of that building because there wasn't a grocery store in town. And she goes, "Would you like to see the building?" Oh my gosh, it was an old Masonic temple. She showed me everything from the basement all the way to the top. Um, then in Green River, I was doing some research and I was taking pictures of a bank building, and somebody saw me and called the police. And so I had to have a little discussion with the police as to why I was taking pictures of their bank building.
They
And
thought you were trying to break in or something.
yeah, business cards come in very handy at that point. Just Google me. I'm right there. I'm a writer. I'm not here to rob the bank.
I think what's interesting is a lot of people have this kind of misperception or preconceived notion of the West early 20th century as just being very rough and rowdy, but there was this dichotomy. It could be, but there were like opera houses and
There
culture
were.
and all these other things that the mining and the money brought in.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, encampment has an opera house, and it doesn't, and most of these small towns had some kind of community hall that they gave a very, like an opera house or whatever name to it. And most of the time it was just a kind of a jumped up community hall. But they had real events and people that toured and came to these small towns because, again, the mining money brought in all kinds of entertainment, and, celebrities of those days would come to entertain. So it was really fascinating. The other thing I found really kind of cool was the number of women-owned businesses that were there. Wyoming was, I think, the first state to
It was the
allow
first
women
state
to
to give women
vote.
the right to vote. Yeah,
And
the
so,
equality state.
yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of women moved there. Just they used it as kind of a lure to get women to come west in many ways. And women ran businesses. There was a woman in that area around encampment who ran a newspaper. She'd inherited it. They ran the newspaper. The other newspapers in the area all called them the Petticoat Press. And, there were slurs back and forth, and you can see it in the paper, the rivalries being printed, well, the Petticoat Press said this, and they, say, well, Joe so-and-so ought to stick his nose somewhere else. And the gossip in the newspapers, fascinating. Just so much fun.
In
So,
addition to being just a fascinating book, A Little Town of Bethlehem is also kind of in a thoughtful way about several other things. It's about second chances. What would you do if you had a chance to live your life over? And also about how you mentioned before, you're not alone, you're part of a community.
mhm. Yeah, it was really a concept that struck me in my early 50s. I met a group of writers up in Surrey, Canada, at a conference, the Surrey International Writers Conference, which anybody who's interested in writing, find a way to go to that writers conference. It's probably the best writers conference on the continent. And it's also virtual. So if you wanted to go virtual, you can go as well that way. But in person is amazing. But I ended up with this group of friends, and we all write very different things. Mary Robinette Wall, who writes science fiction, Eileen Cook, who was writing suspense and is now writing historical fiction for women. Crystal Hunt, who has been writing romance. Susanna Kearsley, who writes beautiful time slip history. Just a very unique collection of people writing all these different things. And we just all clicked, and we became a very tight circle of friends. And not having had that in a long time, it was amazing to me to find that, what I would consider kind of later in life. You know, you think of your friends and everything, and so many of my friends, we've had kids, we've, you know, everybody's scattered. It's not the same, but we've kept connected. We're from all over Canada, Western Canada, Toronto. Mary Robinette is in the East Coast. Liza Palmer, who is down in California. So it's a very diverse group of people, but we each add a piece to that friendship. And we work together, and we have group chats where we get on Zoom and just start, you know, shooting ideas out, and everybody brings a different piece, but the collective whole can be so helpful when you're, you know, struggling with a plot problem or something. And that element of realizing that friendships can come at just any point in your life if you're open to them, and you explore it, and you're just, you know, and you get surrounded. It's an amazing, to me, it was my second chance. It was the affirmation to take the risk to write this book. So, you know, I had reached, I had felt like storytelling wise, I'd reached the end of my well with romance. I had said pretty much everything that I wanted to say in that genre. I needed to do something else. And I had this idea in the back of my head, but I didn't have the confidence. But being surrounded by that group that kept saying, that's a good idea, you should write it. And having that support gave me the courage to do it. So that feeling, that community kind of poured into the book because it truly was my experience.
Let's talk a little bit about your writing process, because this is your first indie published book? Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. It
And that
is. It was it, again, the group. I was like, no, you know, and they're like, and they were like, this book is going to be a tough sell. And I tried a bit, and I had the same thing. Too many pages, to this and that. And I was like, no, the story's good. You have to give it a chance. I know there's an audience for this book. People who want a warm hug of a read. They want to curl up and binge a book all weekend long. I think there's a real market for bigger books. That it's hard with the printing, it's hard with convincing a publisher.
yeah.
Whereas when you do it yourself, then you know you can tell the story you want to tell.
Mhm.
And it's been exciting and terrifying at the same time. I'm like, you mean I have to make that decision? What do
Yeah.
you mean? Isn't there somebody else that makes those decisions for me? I don't want to make the decisions. But
There's a lot of trade-offs going
it
from
is, there
traditional
are.
indie,
There are.
because you do have to, you're in charge. I mean, there's also rewards and there's potential costs. What
Yeah.
um, what was the biggest hurdle for you as a writer in getting this book into print?
Um, I think just making the decision to
Mm.
do it. You know, because I had been traditionally published for 25, 30 years. So, and I just had this chip on my shoulder about going indie, and it was dumb. It was dumb to think like that because the world has changed.
Yeah.
And there are so many wonderful books that are being published and doing well indie. And a lot of them are by writers like me. And
Mhm.
we understand the process. We know you need a copy editor. We know you need you need an editor. You need a copy editor. You need to hire someone who can really develop a beautiful cover. I mean, you know the package. And I knew all that stuff. It was just finding the right people. And again, tapping into the group. Okay, who do you know that's a copy editor? Who do you know? Where do I find these people? Because you can pay the money. I did. I paid an enormous amount of money for a cover, and the cover they developed was horrible.
Wow.
And and then somebody said, you know, I know this wonderful place called 100 Covers, and they'll do a perfect cover for you. And finally I said, and she goes, no, I have a coupon. I am gifting you this coupon. Go get one of their covers. And they came back, and the cover I think is beautiful. I mean, you know,
Yeah, it
I
is a
just think it's a
gorgeous cover.
fabulous cover.
Hmm.
It captures all the elements, and I love the little artwork at the bottom with just
Symbols,
little
yeah.
pieces from the life and the story down there. So, you know, you just have to keep tapping into your network.
Is it going to be available in audio? Are there plans for it?
I don't know. I haven't, it's just come out, so
Yeah. So
I've got to reach out to my former agent and see if she wants to do that. Because I really think it would be great audio.
yeah, I mean it almost like that old radio kind of type of production or something.
It'd
Uh,
be fun. It'd be
let's
fun.
talk about when you start to write a book. I know there's different approaches for different authors, and maybe it's changed for you over the years, but do you always know things in advance? Do you just sit down and let the story take you where it will, so to speak?
Usually with me, I have like three books going. I
Okay.
have the book that's like in production or coming out, or whether O Little Town of Bethlehem. I have been writing on the next book in the series called We Three Kings, trying to get that finished up. And then there's always the back of the head idea. So all of them kind of go through these steps of, the back of the head idea, and then okay, I need to write this, and they percolate. And it's kind of that synchronicity of story. When you have that idea and you start mulling it, you start collecting pieces, the universe starts sending you the things you need, or just those sparks to kind of add to it and grow it, so that by the time I do sit down, I usually have a pretty fully realized idea of what that story is going to become. And then I sit down to write it, and all that goes out the window, and I really find what the story's about. Because characters always surprise you. They always surprise you.
That's interesting. Do you have a set schedule? Or I know there are some writers who like spend 3 weeks madly writing things and then it's done. Others who know I have to do a little bit each day or something.
Yeah, no, I have kind of a weird, I write the same way I always have, whenever I have the time. Um, I have an adult son with disabilities that I have full-time care for. So, um, when his schedule allows, then I write. And up until a few weeks ago, I was helping taking care of my mom. So it's in that sense, it's back to, getting up early and writing first thing in the morning, or, in the evening, I might just start sketching out the next day's pages. I just, when I know that I can get an hour or so, I, put my pieces together and I sit down at the table and I write. So I would love to have the old schedule that I used to have when the kids were little and they'd go to school, and I knew I had 6 hours to just play in my books, but I don't have that anymore. So it's
I think
back to writing like when they were toddlers and I had no time.
well, I think it's good that you mentioned that because it illustrates for aspiring writers that you have to be adaptable to your circumstances. You can't get set into some kind of fixed schedule.
Yeah, I have an Alpha Smart that I use that's like just, do I have it here? Just a moment.
Hmm.
Dun, dun, dun. No, I don't have it. Where is it? Did I slide it in? Here it is. I have one of these. It's an Alpha Smart, and this is my Lifesaver. It's just a
Wow.
keyboard, and it saves. Kids use these for years to learn to type in schools. Writers discovered them; they became all the rage, and now get them. But you can still get them on eBay. They're fabulous. They run on AA batteries, and the batteries last forever. And you can put 100 pages in them and then just plug it into your computer and type away.
Great.
So that travels with me all the time, because anytime chance I get to be able to just sit down and write, I take advantage of it.
You
Words
can,
are words. They
that's
all add
true.
up to pages. They all add up to chapters.
Chapters. You have been writing for a while. We won't say how long, but you know, looking back on what you've learned about the business of publishing, about the business of writing, what advice would you give to yourself when you were first starting out as a writer?
I don't know. That's a hard one. probably lighten up on yourself a little. You know, I think being being envious of other people is a hard thing for writers. You see somebody's book, it takes off, and you just are like, why wasn't that mine? And that can eat at you, or just critiques, people that say harsh things about your writing. It can derail you.
Mhm.
Um, you have to be a duck. The things that happens, it's just water. You just got to let it roll off of you. There was a wonderful writer, oh boy, what was her name? Susie Law. And
Yeah.
she said once, somebody was talking about somebody whose book had taken off, and she goes, well, it was her turn. Just like, oh, okay. So it was her turn. And when I see someone take off, I'm always like, cool, it was her turn or their turn. Or, just allow that grace. There's room for all of us. And I think when you meet the world with that kind of open heart and celebrate other people's success, you'll find your own contentedness with what comes your way.
Mhm. That's great advice. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Elizabeth as a reader, because you've been a
Okay.
writer for a while. You've written historical romance now, kind of time slip, historical fiction, women's fiction. What was Elizabeth like as a reader? Did you always read romance? Do you read across the board? Are there books that...
Funny, because when I started reading romance, it was okay.
Mhm.
We're going to get real here. It was the 70s. And I was like 14, 15, reading, Bertrand Small and, all those real, what they called bodice rippers, ugh,
Yeah.
and, Fabio on the cover and the whole bit. And we would go, my mother and I would go to the used bookstore, and she read Gothics. She loved Gothics.
Mhm.
She and I would go off and I would buy a bag of historical romances and just rip my way through these just seriously naughty books. And my mom had no idea what I was reading because she just thought they were, bigger Gothics
Mhm.
and set with pirates. And it was years later when she read one of them and she just was like, oh my gosh, how old were you when you started reading these? I said, well, clearly didn't ruin me because I'm just fine.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I read romance from a very early period. I started though really reading like Anna Green Gables, and we went to the library every week. I loved going to the library because mom would just set us kids loose and she'd go get her books and we'd get ours, and you knew next week you could come back and get a whole nother stack. So yeah, always reading, always reading. I read all over the place. I love fantasy. I love mysteries. I love historical mysteries. Really love good historical mysteries.
Mhm.
Romance, women's fiction, historical fiction. I just read across the board. Just find I read recently. Oh, I want to talk to you about this book anyway. Have you read the book of Doors?
Now
It's
I've seen
Gareth
it.
Brown, I think,
Yeah,
is the
I
author.
think
Oh my gosh,
really good.
it's great. It's twisty. It's got time travel, it's got magic, it's suspense, and that plot is so twisty and layered. You're just at one point I was reading it and I went, wait a minute. I had to back up and go, okay, yeah, this happened. Yeah, then this happened. Oh, I mean, it is really good. It's a great book.
That's
Highly
great.
recommend it.
Always love recommendations. You've mentioned, and you can say as much as you like or as little, but there are going to be more books in the Bethlehem series.
I hope so. I hope so. I have kind of three cooking. I mean, this first one, and then two more. But we'll see. We'll see. If people love it, then I'll keep writing it. If people don't, I'll find something else to write. I got lots of stories, you know, seeded and that I would love to write.
Hmm.
So I'm never going to run out of stories to write. Just I see the world as story, and ideas come to me and I play with them, and some of them work and some of them don't. So
Or sometimes it's not the time for one story.
it's not the time, and sometimes there's just not enough story there.
Yeah.
It's a good idea, but the story's not there.
Mm. How can readers learn more about your books and you? Do you have websites? Are you on social media?
Oh yeah. You can go to my website, elizabethboyle.com, or find me on Instagram at Eliz Boyle, Elizboyle. I've got a Facebook page. I am on Threads. Um, just, random places. I like social media. I don't like social media. You know what I mean?
So
But
your
I do
website is
like,
probably the starting point.
yeah, I like Instagram. I do like Instagram. There's some great book people there that talk about books. I love that. And, travel pictures, of course. And so pretty pictures, cat videos, it works.
Well, I can't believe we're almost out of time. We've been so very fortunate, I and your virtual audience, to have with us author Elizabeth Boyle, whose new book is O Little Town of Bethlehem. It's a wonderful book and it works for any time of the year. I mean, it is very holiday oriented, but you can read it. I read it in July, so I'm perfectly happy experiencing Christmas in that time of period. Thank you again, Elizabeth, for sharing with us and talking about your new book. And for those tuning in, thank you for joining us for another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Thank you, John. This was so much fun.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who's listening.